All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's another episode of the Plant Free MD. And today I have a special guest and return visitor, Mr. Richard Smith, who's become a good buddy of mine. And we had a great podcast early on a few weeks ago, maybe months ago now, depending on when this comes out, doing a deep dive into um, plant toxins and different sorts of health ramifications from eating different ways and his journey into professional bodybuilding and athletics since then. And that's something we're going to focus on more today is the athletic side of things and training. So Richard, thank you so much for coming back on. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thoroughly enjoyed the last podcast. I think we penciled in 45 minutes and spoke for, I think, over 2 hours. But it's fantastic to speak with like-minded people. But fantastic podcast. If you guys haven't seen that, check that one out. The title sort of differs away from the subject, I think, isn't it? But we do go heavily into plant toxins, health and well-being, different pathways. Fantastic podcast, amazing feedback. Thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm sure that this one is going to be just as informative and enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who may not have seen the last episode, or for those who have, you were a professional bodybuilder and you went through naturally. So you were the British champion, I believe, in pro division, and that's a tested competition. And then you went on to win the European Championship, and I believe that was natural as well. And then and at that point, you sort of switched gears. So maybe tell us how that was, going through that and training as a carnivore and competing against all these other people doing the classic, eating a whole, bunch of pasta and carbs and things like that, their bulking phase and cutting phase, and how that was for you, why you decided not to go on and pursue that, and why you switched gears, and then tell us about the what you were talking about before this, about the 3 pillars of health and performance.
Fantastic. So I decided to compete. I began, I won't go into too much detail about the journey, but super long story short, I adopted a ketogenic lifestyle. I was still consuming lots of plants. At the time, my spinach and don't shout, my spinach and kale smoothies with my turmeric and black pepper. I was considerably healthier than I ever was prior to that. But I had noticed that I'd managed to lose a considerable amount of weight, 107 pounds to be precise. But I was building lean muscle mass, a considerable amount of lean muscle mass, which I was told was impossible without carbohydrate. So I decided to prove how powerful this lifestyle was. I felt that I'd found a secret that nobody else was talking about, that was completely different to any other diet and lifestyle that I'd ever seen before. So I decided to enter an amateur men's physique bodybuilding competition, which everybody begged me not to do it because they knew I suffered severely with anxiety and depression. And I used to struggle to leave my house. That's how difficult the anxiety was. So the thought of walking onto a stage with hundreds of people was something that was unthinkable at the time. But I did. I came second in that comp. I went back a year later, competed again as an amateur, and then I came third and second in 2 different categories. The year after that, I went back and came third, but I was awarded pro status. And I think in that federation, I'm one of only 2 athletes to ever be awarded pro status on a 3rd place.
Nice.
Went back, fantastic. It was so close between us. Now my frame is small. I'm only 5'9". I'm incredibly small framed, and when you see the picture behind me, I look absolutely humongous. But bodybuilding and men's physique is an illusion. So you look bigger on top, and it's the ratio from the waist to the delts and the back. Obviously, I'm considerably smaller now because I've gravitated away from that. But I was never humongous by any means. But I used to compete in age category, and I used to compete against bodybuilders who were 6'2", considerably bigger than me, and just as wide. So if I was stood behind them, you would not see me. But I used to win on ratio and condition, and that's what bodybuilding is. It's almost an illusion. I was, as a keto athlete, I had a tremendous ability to strip to below 3% body fat. My skin was almost transparent, super vascular. And my ratios were incredible, you know, when I was competition ready. And that's how I used to win. So I went back, I competed, I came second as a pro. And the year after that, I went back and I beat the gentleman that beat me that year. And I became British champion. 2 years after that, I went on to the European Championship, which I'd won. I wanted to go the year prior. I did not go. I was invited, but I did not go because I was unvaccinated and I was unwilling to take a vaccination to go. Probably a controversial subject, but I didn't want to become vaccinated, so I missed that opportunity. So I decided to defer it for a year, and I went a year later. I won that just about. I entered 2 categories. I won one, and I came second in the other, which is brilliant. Following that, I decided to come away from it, and for a number of reasons. One, bodybuilding is a lonely sport. It involved me training at unsociable hours by myself for, you know, we do stupid things. When you're in pursuit of a goal, I will work the hardest that I can, and I will use every tool that's available to me in order to achieve that goal. And being ketogenic was that main tool for me. As the progression went on, it might have been just before the British Championship, I gravitated into a carnivore lifestyle. I understood and learned about the effects of plant toxins, and I learned that broccoli and spinach was not serving me. So I became carnivore. I noticed that I was even healthier and fitter than I was prior to that. Now, that said, when I won the European Championship, for me to progress on from there, I felt that I would have needed to have gained a considerable more mass to compete at the next level. And I was competing in tested and non-tested federations. And the reason for that is prize money and prizes were always better in the non-tested. Now, I have nothing against bodybuilders or athletes who are using supplements. I don't understand enough about it to form an opinion. But it's not something I wouldn't hold it. Within the bodybuilding community, the majority of bodybuilders are supplementing, and that's a decision that they have made for their career, and that's fine. For me to progress down that road, I felt that I would have needed to have supplemented, and it's not something that I wanted to do. Again, I'm not against it, but it just wasn't the right fit for me. So I decided to come away, because it would have meant for me to have built that extra mass naturally. I probably would have needed to have taken 5 years out of competing, 5 years of not competing, and training is a long time in your life to commit to something that is, to be honest, a thankless sport. I had this image almost of competing, building up to such a standard that I would win a big competition, and I would come home from this competition, and that there would be, you know, a fanfare of people outside my house, friends and family. Oh, amazing. And I remember driving home, and I was, you know, elated that I had this trophy and I won. And I pulled up at my house, and there was nobody there. Nobody cared. You know, it doesn't mean anything to anybody else. And the people within the sport resent you because it's a competition. So it's almost, you know, I achieved something that I cried on stage. I was so emotional because it's something that, you know, I was training at midnight some nights in order to achieve this goal. I was doing things that other people wouldn't do in regards to nutrition, and, you know, restricting from certain foods. And I love the food that I eat, but it, you know, quite early on, it does take a bit of time to get used to just eating steak and eggs, and the dieting to get to, you know, sub 3% body fat is incredibly difficult, and it hurts. It's hard. It's nothing worth having comes easy, and I pushed to the extremity, to the point where, you know, I felt unwell. Competing is not, it's not healthy, but it was fit for purpose. I wanted to achieve a goal, and I achieved that goal. But in the end, I realized that my family, you know, didn't enjoy me competing because I was always away. I was always training. I never had much time. You know, I have a little girl who's 8 years old. I'm married. So I've got a family, and every opportunity I was training, or I was doing something in preparation for comp, or I was traveling to compete. So I realized that the people closest to me are becoming hurt, you know, or, you know, we're drifting apart. I didn't see friends and family, and the people that I'm away competing with resent you because you've just beaten them. So everywhere you go, there are people that either do not care about what you've achieved, do not care about, you know, the level that you have gone to, or resent you for it. And and that's not to put anybody off competing, because I'm so glad that I did it. It's one of the biggest achievements in my life, and I'm super. It's something that I never imagined was possible, because coming back to the last podcast we did, I am not genetically gifted. In fact, I'll send you a picture of my father, who died 2 years ago from heart complications, and I'll send you. We weren't close. He left when I was 3, and despite only living sort of 10 miles away, we never had a relationship. But despite me reaching out to, you know, several times in order to rekindle that relationship, he wasn't interested. Now, the shame about that is, if he did connect, I could have helped him as a nutritionist. But, you know, it is what it is. But I'll send you that picture, and you can see where, you know, my genetics. I'll send you the picture of where I was when I was only 14 stone. I went up to 17 stone. Now, that doesn't sound heavy to most people, but again, I'm incredibly small framed. At 17 stone, my body fat percentage was in excess of 60%, which is absolutely diabolical. So I was incredibly heavy. I was suffering with lower back pain, and I was ill. I was completely unwell, which we covered in the last podcast. So I beat my genetics, you know, through epigenetics. I flicked the switch on my genes, and I managed to become fit and healthy and beat people who are genetically gifted through using a tool. And that tool is nutrition. And, you know, to be precise, the carnivore lifestyle, and understanding the effect of insulin and carbohydrates and lectins. And these are things that we'll go into now shortly. But I won, you know, I won these competitions in spite of, not because of. You know, I was utilizing a tool that nobody else was using. But it's a part of my life I am incredibly happy that I did. It's something I never could have imagined of achieving when I began that journey, and I'm pleased that I did it. But I'm also happy to be away from it. I now do, you know, I've gone into running and cycling over the last few months. I run with a running club, and it's a social thing. You meet up with these people, you go for a run, you have a chat, and you talk about goals, and everyone is so supportive. When you compete, they come and support you. I didn't have any of this when I was doing the bodybuilding. Nobody cared, you know. So it's a complete different, you know, different look on competing. But that's where I went into that. That's why I've come away from it. I noticed that I built my upper frame too big for my body, and I was suffering with lower back pain again, as I did when I was overweight. So, you know, I was suffering with lower back pain down to the left side. So for all of these factors, I decided to come away. I still train weights, you know, except instead of doing almost every day, I'll do 2 or 3 sessions a week. I quite often mix sessions, because most of my you know, my focus now is on running and cycling. But it's difficult seeing, you know, pictures like this. And a video popped up on Facebook, a memory from 2 years ago, and I wish I still looked like that, you know. And it is difficult when I'm considerably smaller, you know. But I'm fit, I'm healthy, you know, I'm still strong and powerful. But it is aesthetics. You know, I was competing for aesthetics, and now I'm competing for something different. I'm competing for, you know, for athletic ability and to be fast. And I need to be light to be fast. I need that power to weight ratio, which is all these things that we'll go into. But that's why I came away from bodybuilding. The commitment for the next 5 years wasn't worth my time, I believed, unless you were going to be, you know, Mr. Olympia. And I'm never going to be that size. My frame would not allow me to grow into that category. And that is the category that, you know, you make your money in. You know, if you become a mass monster. That's not something I wanted. That's not something I believe my body could have achieved naturally. Yeah, in fact, I think it's impossible. I don't think my body would ever achieve anything close to that. And I didn't want to take the time to try. It just wasn't worth, those risks and my time and effort. So I've come away. I've come away from it.
Yeah, nice. And then so obviously you've got the bona fides, so you've achieved a very high level of success in a very demanding sport, and come to the pinnacle of
In a short space of time.
In a very short space of time, and not using shortcuts, like performance enhancing drugs and things like that, which is that was one of the top comments when I posted the thumbnail last time, because I had that picture back there of you, in your competition, flexing and just ripped to hell. And it was just like, it's just like, yeah, European champion on Carnivore, like, yeah, I know, buttload of steroids. It's like, well, no, actually. And that's the amazing thing, is that when someone accomplishes something like that, instantly it must be steroids. Right.
It's
and and that's it's a good guess in that sport,
for sure. I believe I only met 2 other competitors, one of which was ketogenic, by the way. And he won the British Championship in a different category the same day that I won. Nice. So out of 2 keto competitors, we both won a British title. He's a police officer, and you can tell when you look at someone's physique, if you know anything about in performance enhancing drugs, your jawline changes, over time. Your physique, the way that your traps appear, you hold more water. And I think anybody that's involved with that sport, you can generally look at someone and hazard a pretty good guess if they are supplemented. But if you saw me on stage, and in fact, I'll see if I'll find a picture. I'll send you a picture on stage of one of the competitions. I'm not big, I'm not big. I'm incredibly small, but I won because of my ratios. And I think you can tell. I think, anybody that is involved with the sport or anything can tell by looking at something that, it is unsupplemented. And it was achieved through diet and through the science that you and I are gonna go through in this presentation that I put together. But yeah, there's things that people don't understand in regards to nutrition, and it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that was always a thing too. I get accused of that all the time. Just like looking, oh well, look, he's on steroids and this, that, and the other. And the funny thing is like a lot of those pictures that they're saying that I'm clearly on steroids for, like literally hadn't been in the gym in months. It was like, okay. Of all the pictures, like that's the one, like when I'm not actually doing anything. And then people would say that, but they'll hear those sorts of things and be like, well, if you look at the traps, you look at this, you look at that, and then they'll sort of hear that and they'll paper in basically whatever. And like, I love working traps. I don't know, that's the most rewarding lift is shrugs, because you can go up in weight so quick. I was able to put on 45s on each side, so go up 90 pounds a week every single week. Wow. I got to the point where I maxed out the entire bar, and I'm just shrugging this huge amounts. And the plates are all clinking together, go, 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 go. And people are like, well, what the hell? And like they were like way bigger than me, going like, how that, and I loved that lift. So I always had just massive traps, because I worked the hell out of my traps, like disproportionately. Like that was just my favorite. That was just always my favorite lift. And but I've never done that stuff. Never needed to. And, the athletes that I work with and I've seen, and even just the patients and normal patients that I work with on a daily basis who go on Carnivore, the difference in their testosterone is remarkable. And their growth hormone and IGF and all these sorts of things, they improve so much. And in not that long of a time, like obviously a lot longer than, a needle in your ass. But, in the grand scheme of things, taking 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and your testosterone goes up by 30%, that's massive.
That's
That's
huge.
massive. And all
Yeah.
the other hormones are coming up proportionately as well. And then some more than that. So Ryan Talbot, who I've had on the podcast, I just spoke with him again. He was NCAA decathlete. He went carnivore, and then on his second decathlon, he ended up winning the Big 12 competition. Went to nationals, got All-American honors as a carnivore. And they tested his testosterone before he went carnivore, and he just wasn't really feeling well, just wasn't feeling great. And he's just like, oh, there's something wrong, there's something off. And they tested all of this stuff, and like, no, everything's fine. We can't see anything wrong. He's like, yeah, well, something's wrong. So, keep looking. And so we found carnivore and tried that, and then felt amazing. And all his health improved dramatically the next year. So it was 1 year later, and he's training his ass off. He's doing everything right. He's sleeping right. He's now eating right. And he's working very hard, at a NCAA 1 level. And they tested his testosterone again, and it went up it was like 730, which is good. It's good. It's really good. And it went up to 1150.
Wow.
Right. And so, it didn't double, but it, went up, a solid 60%. And to the point that his doctor's like, yeah, you might actually have to get tested for that. We might actually have to take a look. And then like the next week, he got randomly selected by the NCAA to get tested for steroids. And of course, he was negative for that. So he passed. And but that's just a testimony to this, is like, you don't actually have to do that. Like, you just eating properly, which is crazy, you were able to achieve something that other people who, by what you're saying, were genetically more gifted than you, that they needed steroids to achieve, and you still beat them.
Yeah.
That's how powerful this is. You can actually get your hormones up better than if you were taking steroids, right?
Yeah.
To a certain degree. Obviously, you take a lot of steroids, but you're not going to get it all in proportion. You're not going to do it healthfully. It's not going to be something that you can sustain and maintain long term and can provide you health for decades and decades and decades. That's not going to happen, but it can actually give you as good or sometimes better effects. And obviously, you're not going to get the mass monster effect unless you have crazy genes. If you're just built for that, then maybe, like Christ, what was the dude's name? Mr. Olympia, like most winningest Mr. Olympia. Damn it. What was his name?
I got brain freeze. Yeah, I've my mind's gone blank too.
Coleman. Ronnie Coleman.
Ronnie Coleman, yeah.
Yeah. So he was getting like third in these big pro competitions and things like that, because he was gifted, and that's what he said. I was just gifted, and he was a beast, but he just couldn't quite win the big competitions because these guys were just really going to town on the PEDs. He wasn't using PEDs, and he was able to compete at that level, but he couldn't win. Right. And so he finally said, screw it, I'll do it. And so even Ronnie Coleman, who is like just a phenom physically, he even needed to do that to compete with these other people who were doing a lot of it. Yeah. But maybe if you went carnivore, you never know, because I don't think he was, but who knows? But yeah, but either way, that brings us back to the presentation you were talking about. This is something you give to actual athletes that are trying to, accomplish something with their life. And can you take us through that on the sort of the 3 pillars of
for sure,
physical health and performance?
Let's move this over there. So yeah, there are semi-pro athletes at a fairly high level that we work with, and I'll go on to one of these a little bit later on. But these are the 3 pillars that I try to recommend to people. So these are my 3 pillars for athletic performance. So in order to gain that athletic performance, we're looking at a good power to weight ratio. So we need to be powerful, but as light as possible. Now, regardless of what discipline we compete in, we need low body fat and we need more lean muscle mass. We need the ability to repair, rebuild, and recover. So for this, we need quality nutrients. So we need bioavailable nutrients. And finally, we need lots of energy. We need energy on demand, superior energy, and lots of it. So these are my 3 pillars. Now, when we look at the standard type of diet, this is the eat well plate. The Eat Well plate is based predominantly on carbohydrate. Obviously, the protein percentage of this is going to change depending on whether we live in a standard lifestyle or whether we are an athlete. But generally, it predominates carbohydrates. And this is how it looks on our plate. And we cook these foods in vegetable and seed oils. Now, I'll be the first to admit that that looks healthy. We've got chicken on there, we've got pasta, we've got some tomatoes, peas, and bell peppers, etc. You and I know that this isn't healthy, but this is what, if you showed this, yeah, we'll go through each one of these as we go. But if you were to show that to a typical athlete, they would assume that that is a highly healthy meal and cooked in vegetable oils.
Definitely.
But to look at this power to weight ratio, we need to be able to lose body fat. We need low body fat and we need high rate of muscle mass. But everybody looks at the caloric model. Everybody bases things on calories in, calories out. Now, energy needs to be accounted for, but the caloric model is highly flawed, and it's flawed for a number of reasons. The caloric model doesn't account for the effect of insulin, doesn't account for the thermic effect of food, metabolic rate, and ketogenesis. And we'll explain what each of these are now, but we need to understand that all carbs break down into sugar. So regardless of what source the carbohydrates are, they all break down into sugar. And this sugar breaks down into glucose. And the glucose is then stored in the liver and muscle as glycogen. But when these stores are full, it overspills and stores as fat. And this is how the body stores fat. This is how we typically store fat. So we don't store fat typically through the overconsumption of dietary fat. It's the overconsumption of carbohydrate in the form of glucose. Now, this is the mechanism that it goes through. So when we consume carbohydrate, the pancreas releases insulin. It upregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which breaks the bonds on the glycerol backbone and signals the body to store fat. Now, this occurs in regardless of caloric value. If you consume carbohydrate, insulin signals the body to store fat. Now, this is a perfectly normal process. But for us to burn this fat for fuel, we need to almost perform this action in reverse. But we need another enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase breaks the bonds again on the glycerol backbone and puts fatty acids into the bloodstream. The issue with this is that when insulin is elevated, insulin blocks hormone-sensitive lipase. It blocks our body's ability to put these fatty acids into the bloodstream. And in doing so, prevents our body's ability to burn this body fat. So to put this in perspective, if you wake up in the morning and you consume a bowl of muesli or some toast or whatever it may be to fuel your workout in order to burn fat, you are not burning fat because that increased insulin, it makes it biologically impossible for us to burn that body fat when insulin is elevated. We need insulin to drop back down in order to burn that body fat. So carbohydrates fueling your workout for the sake of burning body fat is absolutely counterintuitive. So we need to understand that insulin is a storing hormone and it wants to store fat, which brings me on to these vegetable oils that we cook in. You and I don't, obviously, and I'm sure most of your listeners don't either, but these vegetable oils are high in an oxidized omega-6 called linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid causes inflammation, damages the liver, and leads to further insulin resistance. As a percentage, this linoleic acid is leading to 6% higher insulin resistance than carbohydrates do. It's also high in phytosterols, which lowers our natural cholesterol and causes all sorts of issues in regards to hormone production. So these vegetable oils were originally created as machine lubricant. You can fuel your diesel car on these vegetable oils, and they have since found their way into the food industry. They have no place in the human diet. They are not meant for human consumption. And as the study showed, that this higher omega-6 intake is associated with weight gain in both animal and human studies. And as a side note, it also increases leptin resistance. So these vegetable oils that we are cooking these foods in, they tell the body to store fat. So it's not just the carbohydrate, it's also the effect, the fat storage effect of these vegetable oils, which brings me on to lectins. So on that plate, we had a lot of pasta, amongst other things, which we'll go into a bit more detail in as well. But grains are high in lectins. Lectins bind to insulin receptors and they signal the body to store 5 times more fat than insulin does itself. So to put that into perspective, if we had a bowl of muesli, which contained 100 calories, or a piece of steak, which contained 100 calories, the fat storage, the insulin effect of that muesli or bread or pasta, and the lectin effect of binding to those insulin receptors is signaling the body to store 5 times more fat. So all of these factors are breaking down the whole caloric theory. It's not the calories that govern whether we gain or lose weight. Energy needs to be accounted for, but energy can be wasted in the body through a number of mechanisms, to which we'll go into now. But coming back to the leptin, leptin is a satiety hormone. It tells us when we're full, but lectins block leptin. They block our body's ability to tell us that we're full. So we've just taken out pillar number 1 purely through, that meal, that dish, that plate that I've just presented is absolutely counterintuitive to losing that body fat and lowering our body fat and increasing lean muscle mass. I'll stop there for 2 seconds. I'll let you chirp in if you've got anything to add, and then we can go on to the next part. But that plate is basically absolutely counterintuitive to losing weight. And we'll go into more detail in that. But is there anything that you wanted to jump in on there?
No, I think that's all. I agree with all that. I mean, I think there's, calories in, calories out is hugely problematic for all the reasons that you displayed. But, I mean, and more broadly, because these chemicals have chemical reactions. It's completely reductionist to say that the only thing that matters about, this fat molecule is that if you burn it, it releases 9 kilocalories per gram. That's one thing that is one of its properties, but it is a complex organic molecule that has complex chemical interactions in your body and with other chemicals. Every single amino acid has a different chemical reaction in your body than every other amino acid. Every single carbohydrate has a different chemical reaction in your body than every other carbohydrate. And every single fatty acid has a different reaction as well, maybe slightly different, but it is different. And so these are going to have differences in your body, and they can have a different hormonal effect as well. And obviously with insulin and leptin, those are major factors in your hormonal health. Leptin is, it's a satiety hormone. It causes you to, it can cause, if you're blocking this, you're interrupting this, your brain's not seeing this, then you can even think that you're starving when you're not, and you end up overeating. I have to eat more because you're like, oh, exactly. I don't have enough leptin. But it's also it's a keystone hormone in other ways as well. It binds in our hypothalamus, and it signals a lot of other things to happen and take place, and a lot of other hormones to become active or be released in the first place. So if your leptin is out of balance, it will not only cause you to eat more, or can precipitate increased hunger signals that may cause some people to eat more, but it can also disrupt the normal workings of your hormones in a number of different ways. And so these things have huge knock-on effects. So just saying that, just like, yeah, it doesn't matter, all it is calories, that's just way too simplistic. Like, we are way more complicated than that. There's a lot more going on. And then, like you were saying, it's the overconsumption of carbohydrates, this triggers insulin and seed oils, and this triggers fat storage. Whereas you don't really see that from excess fat. And one of the reasons you don't see that from excess fat is it's damn near impossible to have excess fat in your diet, because you just don't absorb it. You predominantly absorb fat through your bile. And when you run out of bile, you have a really hard time absorbing fat. And most of it will get passed out. So, it's, when people say, like, oh, well, you just don't want to eat too much fat. Well, what does too much mean? And define that, because we're still going back to that whole thing. Fat is bad at a certain level, I don't think that it's that easy to obtain that level. Maybe if you were taking ox bile or something like that, and you were forcing your body to absorb way more fat, I'm sure you'd run into problems. Or if but the only other way to do it is if you have a genetic anomaly where you're making way too much bile, which I guess could happen, but I don't know how common that would be. It's probably very rare, if at all. But the only other way to do it is if you get that very small percentage that you can absorb. You just eat so much that even that small percentage ends up being an excessive amount. But you would have such torrential diarrhea as a result of that, from all the fat that would be leaving your body, that no one with any sense of self-preservation is going to be able to attain that. And it would be very, very, very difficult to do that, and very noticeable if that were about to happen. So, I just, yeah, I think that for all of those reasons, it is, very important to know what you're putting in your body.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So on to my next pillar. So our body's ability to repair, rebuild, and recover. Again, we need quality nutrients, and they need to be bioavailable. And I'm going to show you why that plate, again, is absolutely counterintuitive. Again, grains are also high in phytic acid as well as lectins. Now, other foods contain phytic acid and lectins as well, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. But this is a study that looks at zinc absorption. Now, phytic acid blocks the absorption of zinc, iron, and magnesium. Zinc is essential for the production of testosterone. Iron is important for supplying oxygen to the muscle to aid with building and repairing. And magnesium is crucial for supporting muscle and energy production. And what this study shows is that when we consume oysters, which are incredibly high in zinc, and we consume it with corn tortillas, that zinc absorption is blocked by 100%. Zero zinc is absorbed. So the food that we consume with our nutrient-dense foods has a massive impact on our body's ability to absorb those nutrients. So when we are consuming foods high in lectins and phytic acid, they block the absorption of these things. Now, testosterone, you may be thinking, well, we need testosterone to build muscle, but we all need testosterone. Even women need testosterone. So this isn't just about building muscle. Iron is essential, and so is magnesium. We all need muscle for life. So this isn't just a case of athletic performance. This is for health and well-being as well. But this is the effect the phytic acid has on the body. And we'll quickly go back to lectin. So this is my interpretation of the microvilli line of the gut. Very basic, I know, but when we consume food, the nutrients come in, they bind to the microvilli line of the gut, which are like little fingers that absorb nutrients. So we have all of this surface area to absorb nutrients. But what happens when we consume lectins is the lectins in the form of wheat germ agglutinin, which is found in these breads, pastas, rice, they bind to these cells lining the microvilli, or the line in the gut, and they take up the surface area. They almost do this, so reducing the surface area. So we're actually absorbing way less nutrients than we're consuming. But it gets even worse than that, and this is something that we've covered I think in the last one, and I know it's something you've covered several times before, but when these lectins come into the gut, they bind to the epithelial cells, or the enterocytes lining the gut, and they cause the release of a molecule called zonulin. Now, when zonulin's released, it causes a gap in the tight junction between these epithelial cells, which allows undigested protein molecules to travel into the bloodstream where they shouldn't be, and the body sees them as a foreign invader and creates antibodies to fight them. The issue with this is through a process called molecular mimicry, the body then starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. This is autoimmune disease. So these lectins will cause intestinal permeability in everyone. If we are consuming bread, pasta, rice, we have what's called leaky gut. We have holes lining our intestines in the gut. And this causes all sorts of issues, neurological issues, aches and pains in joints, fatigue, inflammation. So this is absolutely counterintuitive to healing and repairing and being fit and healthy. So grains are detrimental to our health. So by consuming that plate that we just showed that contained pasta, which is a grain, but we'll go on to the other ingredients on that plate as we go along, because that plate of pasta, the pasta was not the only food on there that contains lectins, and I'll explain why a little bit later on. But that plate is absolutely counterintuitive to repairing and building, because the lectins and phytic acid on that dish is blocking the absorption of those amino acids and those fats that are found within the protein. That chicken on that plate is the most nutrient-dense food on that plate. And I would argue that the chicken, as nutrient-dense as it is, isn't the most nutrient-dense food anyway. So, I mean, we would replace that maybe with beef, for example. But that plate is absolutely counterintuitive to athletic performance, because it's blocking our body's ability to repair, rebuild, and recover. Which takes me on to would you like to jump in there, Anthony, before I move on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it just, and the list goes on of all the different sorts of anti-nutrients there are, different ways that plants will block your digestion, block your body's ability to absorb food, protease inhibitors in wheat and soy and many other plants that will block your protease enzymes from your pancreas, so you can't break down protein anyway. So even though you have perfectly bioavailable meat, if you're eating that in a sandwich, say, you're going to get these protease inhibitors, and that's going to disrupt your body's ability to break down meat even. So, when you eat meat with other things, it actually changes the way your body can digest and absorb and deal with them. And some people, when they say, well, I have a problem eating meat, I get upset stomach, I get bloating, I point that out to them. And then when they actually try eating just meat on its own, they find that, oh, actually they don't get any bloating, they don't get any problems. And that's because they're actually absorbing what they're eating. It's not getting to their the bacteria in their gut and causing problems and gas. And there's so many more. I mean, even just just the nutrients just not being available in plants. You can have a lot of iron in spinach, but we're not getting it. There's a lot of niacin in corn, but we're not getting it. And so and all the glucose that's in fiber, that is completely inaccessible to us. And that's on purpose. The plant is binding these nutrients in ways that are hard to break down chemically, so that animals don't profit and benefit from eating them, because they don't want you to profit and benefit by eating them, because they don't want to die. They want you to go eat something else and leave them the hell alone. And so not being able to absorb their nutrients and access what's good about them as living creatures is a survival benefit to plants, as well as these different direct toxins and inhibitors as well.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
all has to do with bioavailability. It all comes in. Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely counterintuitive. I was speaking to a client of mine recently who disagreed with what I was saying, because coming back to a point you said, that whenever they eat meat, they have an upset stomach.
yeah,
And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I had a steak sandwich. It's like, well,
yeah,
is it actually the steak or is it the bread?
yeah,
So yeah, this is a case of people confusing the foods that they're eating and blaming the wrong food. Steak or beef, animal proteins are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. It's not the animal
yeah,
proteins that are causing the issue.
yeah. And think about that too. What's if something is bioavailable to us, it's 100% bioavailable to us, we're near that. That is obviously what we're biologically more predisposed, designed to eat. If you're eating plants, we're not able to break these things down, we're not able to detoxify these things completely, we're not able to access all the nutrients. We don't even have all the nutrients in plants anyway. So any nutritionist that says a vegan diet is best doesn't understand nutrition, because how can you as a nutritionist argue for a diet that is devoid of essential nutrients like B12, which you cannot get from plants? You just can't, and there's so many others. And people can play word games on how you can get different nutrients where, but you're not explaining B12 anywhere, and all the other ones are pretty garbage as well. So anyone who argues, any nutritionist who argues for a diet that's deficient in nutrients is not a good nutritionist, and is obviously held up by different sorts of narratives and ideologies. So if we're designed to eat something like every other animal on earth, that's going to be the thing that's most healthy for us. And if something that's completely bioavailable to us versus something that's not completely bioavailable to us, maybe it's partially, maybe it has some poisons, maybe they're not that bad, but there's something there that we are not fully adapted to. We're not adapted to it, right? So that's not our biologically appropriate diet. End of story. And when animals eat their biologically appropriate diet, they are more healthy. That is a fact. And I'm sure we'll have more and more studies that can prove that, but that's what we see in every other animal on this earth. And there's no reason to suspect that humans would be any different. You look at the rates of chronic diseases in native populations before they were introduced to Western food, it was zero, essentially. And so Weston A. Price did a big study on that sort of thing, and it goes back hundreds of years to different anthropologists and explorers. So if you're eating what you're designed to eat, what you're biologically designed to eat, you're going to be more healthy. You're going to, for all those different reasons, because you're going to get all the nutrients, because you're not going to get anything bad with the nutrients. You're not going to get bad with the good. And if something is completely bioavailable, you have to think, well, maybe we're designed to eat this. Maybe we're more adapted to eat this. And if something is not completely bioavailable, something has some toxins that we aren't fully adapted and capable of disarming, then that means that we're probably not biologically designed to eat that thing. So there's just some things to think about. Those are just facts. and you can piece those together the way you want to. I piece that together, meaning, in the way that, well, why don't we eat our most bioavailable food that has no downside to it, which is fatty meat, and avoid the things that we aren't perfectly adapted for. That for me makes a bit of sense as to how the most appropriate way for our species to eat. What's biologically appropriate for your species is what you're biologically designed to eat. I mean, that's just definitions, the definition in terms.
Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's so simple that it almost seems too easy, but it is.
Yeah.
This is what I
Yeah.
don't understand when I speak with vegans and vegetarians about, having to get nutrients from different sources or having to supplement with things. Now, supplements don't work as well as people think. We are consuming a supplement in, all of these different supplements, which aren't real. They're not real vitamins and minerals.
Mm-hmm.
They quite often come from plants. They carry low bioavailability. They compete for absorption, meaning very little of them are absorbed. Iron, when you take an iron tablet, most of it comes out the other end. This is why, everything turns green. The body isn't absorbing vitamin C in a supplement form. Is ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is one part of vitamin C. That is just one part that makes up vitamin C. You can't get vitamin C through one item, one part of that. And in order to do so, the body will take these other 5 parts, I believe, from other parts of the body in order to create that vitamin C, which leads us to void. So these supplements, vitamins and minerals, they don't work, and it makes you question, why do you need to supplement when a piece of steak contains every one of those things in a highly bioavailable volume? It just makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
For sure. So energy, obviously, when we are competing as an athlete, energy is really important. This is a big topic that comes into play. So when I spoke with bodybuilders, for example, they need carbs to lift heavy weights. This was their argument. When you speak to endurance athletes, well, I need carbs to run a 10-hour Ironman, which is total rubbish. It doesn't make any sense at all, because an elite athlete can store around 10,000 kilojoules in their liver and muscle of glycogen, which isn't an awful lot. And we'll come on a little bit further on this now. But this is why a lot of athletes bonk during a triathlon, and they're having to continuously supplement with glucose energy gels, and they get all sorts of gastro distress. But it is not, this isn't the optimal way to fuel. And I'll explain why now. But what I'm going to go on to is cellular respiration, how we create energy. Now, part of cellular respiration is the conversion of NAD plus to NADH. So it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. We all have NAD, and as we age, NAD levels lower. They decline with age, and NAD is required for fundamental biological processes within the body. We've got a limited supply, and as we age, this supply is depleted over time. Low levels will lead to chronic degenerative diseases such as cardiovascular disease and certain types of cancer. So NAD is super important. A lack of NAD would lead to fatigue and weight gain and metabolic syndrome. Now, when we look at how we create energy or utilize energy, let's look at glucose. Glucose costs, so for us to process one glucose molecule, it costs the body 2 NAD plus molecules there and 2 there. So it's costing the body 4 NAD plus molecules. For us to process ketones in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate, it costs the body 1. So that makes energy production, ketone energy production, 400% more efficient at a cellular level. And all of these things, this decline in NAD plus to NADH leads to oxidative stress and aging. And this is why I believe that athletes who consume high levels of carbs early on in their career, they retire at a young age in their 30s, and they begin to age incredibly quickly, as well as gaining a lot of weight. And it's because of this oxidative stress and damage to their cells from the overconsumption of carbohydrate. So let's look at that again. So an elite athlete can store 10,000 kilojoules. A ketogenic athlete can store 150. That's 15 times more energy in stored fat than we can store as a carb athlete in the form of glycogen. So we've just taken out all of the pillars. And we'll go on to some of the mechanisms behind energy now, but it is absolutely counterintuitive as an athlete, whether you're endurance or strength, to supply your body with an energy system that you need to keep topping up, that keeps crashing when you can supply the body. I work with elite athletes, and I've got a really good one to show you a little bit later on. Some of these guys compete in Ironman for 10 to 14 hours, depending on their ability. Yeah, which is incredible. And some of these athletes I've been working with were fueled on nothing other than water and electrolytes for the entire event. They did not, and fasted. They did not eat before the event. They did not eat during the event. All they consumed was water and electrolytes for the entire event. Now, this is a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a marathon. And no fueling at all, which is absolutely phenomenal. The carb athletes taking in these energy gels, having to stop in the toilet because they're suffering with gastro distress from consuming 120 grams of carbohydrate every hour, which is not good for your digestive system. They constantly need to be refueling with this energy source, with this quick release and energy source, when ketones supply this superior energy, which is 400% more efficient. So this plate that we looked at in the beginning, we've got the pasta, high in phytic acid and lectins. We've got the tomatoes, high in lectins. The peas, high in phytic acid and lectins. The bell peppers, high in lectins. The spinach, high in oxalates. That plate is a plate full of anti-nutrients. The most nutritious food or item on that plate is the chicken. And most of those nutrients within that chicken are being blocked by the other anti-nutrients on that plate. That plate for health and athletic performance is absolutely counterintuitive. So as the caption on the right says, so if this isn't the answer, what is? It was simple, and it's almost too simple. This is the magic elixir. This contains every vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. It contains everything that we need, from vitamin A down to zinc, choline, creatine, carnitine, carnosine, taurine. Everything that we need is found in red meat. And within this carries other benefits, because protein carries a high thermic effect. So coming back to pillar one in regards to losing this weight, protein spends a large portion of its calories to digest, absorb, and process, around 25 to 35%. Carbs is 5 to 10, and fats is 0 to 5. So if we look at that image that we looked at the beginning of the macronutrient split of the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, if we were to swap the volume of carbohydrate to protein, but not change the overall caloric value, the thermic effect of that additional protein could allow us to burn an additional 380 calories per day. And I know we said it isn't the calories, but this is energy in the form of heat. We are wasting energy that we have eaten through doing nothing other than swapping out carbohydrate for protein. Coming into this low carb, carnivore, or ketogenic lifestyle, we also increase metabolic rate. So this is a fantastic study that looks at low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. The study was isocaloric, which means everyone was on the same calories. And what the study shows is that the low carb group increased metabolic rate to the sum of 278 calories on average compared to the high carb group. So when people say it's all about the calories, it's not the calories, it's what we are eating, it's what we are consuming. Going low carb increases metabolic rate. Consuming more protein increases thermic effect. Removing all of these carbohydrates is removing the body's ability to increase insulin and tell the body to store fat. Removing these lectins is removing the body's ability to bind to those insulin receptors and signaling the body to store fat. Removing the lectins is taking away the body's ability to negate the nutrients found within those foods. So that plate is absolutely counterintuitive. And now we've gone low carb. The glucose in the form of glycogen is now released from the muscle and is now sent into the bloodstream. And now we're able to become ketogenic, which we're live in a carnivore state. And this simply means that being ketogenic is our natural metabolic state. It's the metabolic state we're born in, and it's the metabolic state that we've evolved in our entire existence. Now, that should tell you everything that you need to know about being carnivore and ketogenic. This is the way that we are meant to live. This is how we spent our time hunting and catching our meals. We were in a ketogenic state. We did not spend days consuming carbohydrates every 2 hours throughout the day, which is the typical sort of bodybuilding diet, isn't it? Every 2 hours to get the protein in. We went days sometimes without food. Going days without food would put us into a state of autophagy, which is cellular repair and regeneration. And this allows us to increase the body's ability to heal and repair. And by doing so, we increase testosterone and human growth hormone. So fasting increases testosterone and human growth and carries a whole other host of benefits, as well as brown fat activation and lipolysis and ketogenesis. But when we do this, the fat cell now releases those fatty acids into the bloodstream. It's sent to the liver converts them into ketones, and these ketones are sent to the mitochondria in the cell for us to use for energy. And this is how a ketogenic athlete or someone living a keto carnivore lifestyle gets their energy. And the beauty from doing this is that a state of low insulin and elevated ketones or a ketogenic state activates uncoupling or increases the activity of UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. Now, this signals our stored fat to act in the way that brown fat does. So I'm sat in front of you. My body is literally wasting energy. My fat cells are literally just burning energy. So energy or heat needs to be accounted for. But the caloric intake that I have consumed is not an accurate gauge by any means, because I now consume well over the caloric value that I used to when I was consuming carbs. Some days I consume between 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, and I still maintain single-figure body fat. Whereas when I was consuming carbohydrate at 2007, I would gain weight or fat regularly. Every week I would gain a pound or two. Now, these ketones, we're breathing them out and we are peeing them out. The beauty of this is that ketones supply superior energy. Carbs is an inefficient energy source. So what I used to find when I was working for an engineering company before I began working for myself, my energy was spent spiking and crashing throughout the day. So I'd wake up in the morning, I'd eat a bowl of cereal with a banana because I believed it was healthy. So in effect, I was having sugar with my sugar. And then I was hungry. So 10 o'clock in work, I'd have a cup of coffee with a biscuit. And then that would work for a while. And then I was hungry again. And lunchtime, I'd have chicken and pasta because that's healthy, right? Well, it isn't, you know. I was soon hungry again and then crashing. Then I was eating cakes and crisps at 3 o'clock. My day was spent spiking and crashing. And come 3 o'clock, if I could not get my hands on food, I would have hunted down a small child just to eat something, you know. You become
and steal his lunch money. I'm sure you were going to say.
And steal his lunch. Yeah, that's it. But you become hungry on carbohydrates. Now, I do become hungry living a carnivore lifestyle, but I never become hungry. And I get to the point where I think throughout the day, you know, I could do with eating some steak. I'll get pulled to one side with a call, an email, a consultation, whatever it may be. 10 minutes later, I've forgotten about it. That is out of my head. I am no longer hungry. I have forgotten that I was even hungry. 4, 5, 6 hours later, oh yeah, I was just about to put a steak on, you know? So you don't pick up because your body taps into this stored energy source. We've got an unlimited supply of energy. And what we do is we seamlessly flick this switch from dietary fat into body fat. And this is what people don't seem to comprehend when we live a ketogenic carnivore lifestyle. We have all the energy that we need stored in our body fat. You will be incredibly hard pressed to burn all of your stored body fat. It would take, and I'd argue, weeks with an average. Or in fact, there was a gentleman from Scotland, wasn't there, who went well in excess of a year of not consuming anything. Now, he had a lot of fat to burn, but he did not eat anything other than water, electrolytes, and vitamins, I believe, for in excess of a year. And that just goes to show that our body stores fat as food. This is our stored food. It's there to fatten us up for a cold winter and for us to utilize energy at a later date. The problem with modern society is that later date never comes. We just keep on topping up this stored body fat. And this is why you see runners who run regularly in your local park run, who are very good runners, but are incredibly overweight. They are fit in spite of and not because of. They're fit because they go through the effort of running every week, but they weigh 16, 17 stone. They're fit in spite of being healthy, not because of being healthy. So these ketones supply superior energy at a much higher level. These ketones will bleach the blood-brain barrier when glucose can't. And you don't get these spikes and crashes. You almost get this like little subtle wave that isn't so severe. So you can literally go days and days and days. And if for any of you who have done extended fasting, you'll probably find that day 2 and 3, your mental clarity increases. You actually have more energy on day 2 and 3 than you did on day 1, you know, when you were still consuming food. So ketones are the superior energy source. Now, when it comes to athletic performance, there's a few arguments in regards to why ketones will not work. One is, and you get this from powerlifters and bodybuilders, well, I need carbs to lift heavy weights. Well, when you're lifting heavy weights, you're doing 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 reps. Now, you were not hitting the glycolytic energy system, which is where the carbohydrates come into. When you were lifting heavy weights, you were using the PC system, the phosphocreatine energy system. This lasts typically between 10 to 13 seconds, depending on whether you're supplementing with creatine or whether you were consuming lots of meat. But the PC system does not use glucose. We do not use any carbohydrate to lift heavy weights. So when you become ketogenic, as long as you are having adequate sodium, and sodium is found in the foods we eat, or we can add sodium through pink Himalayan or Celtic sea salt or some form of salt. This is not going to, it may impact those lifts initially as your body's adapting. So typically we'll drop off the edge of a cliff, but this will soon upregulate as the body adapts. But strength quickly comes back. Now, to put this into perspective, I am incredibly small. I trained with bodybuilding for years and years and years. And I was going to go into powerlifting before I decided to do the running and cycling. And the reason is that I work with a powerlifter who is number 2 in Britain in his category. And I am strong. I was stronger than he was. Maybe not now because I'm not training so much. At 75 kilograms. So what's that in pounds? Let's work that out. Do that for you guys now because you guys work in pounds. I like to work in pounds as well because it always sounds better. 165. So incredibly light, okay? 165 pound. My top bench press is 165K. So in pounds, my top bench press is 363. My top squat isn't as impressive, but my top squat was 190K. So that's 418 pounds. And my deadlift was 230. So that's 506 pound. Weigh in 165K. So my power to weight ratio was pretty good. So in my age and weight category, you know, I would have done pretty well within the British competitions. I decided to go into the running and cycling, but it just goes to show that no, I do not consume carbohydrate yet. You know, for my size, you know, that's fairly strong. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of people in the gym that are quite shocked when you're pushing, you know, those sorts of weights on the bench and squat and deadlift. So incredibly happy with those, but you don't need, no, I was supplementing with creatine. Now there is an argument you don't need to because it's found in high amounts in red meat, but I did supplement with creatine. Creatine is fantastic. I love creatine. It's not just good for the muscle, it's good for the brain, but you do not need carbohydrates for heavy lifts. Now the aerobic system, which is our long distance stuff, well, we're tapping into fat stores. So that's a no-brainer. You know, we know that fat and ketones is superior on that. Now, the only question is on the glycolytic energy system, which comes into question for those high intensity bouts. So maybe someone on an Ironman who's on the bike, who needs to push up a hill and really give it some, they believe that they need carbohydrates to tap into their energy system, but we don't. Being ketogenic or keto adapted carnivore, the body upregulates the lactic acid system. So what happens is the muscle will build up with lactate, and our muscle will send that lactate to the liver, and the liver will convert it into glycogen and send it back to the muscle at a higher rate, arguably, than a carbohydrate athlete. So, and you did hear me correctly, despite consuming carbohydrate, we have the ability to fill our muscles with muscle glycogen. So if all of this is true, why do we all believe that being carnivore and ketogenic is a load of rubbish? And it's because this is what the studies show. So these are 2 studies. These studies show that these studies compared what they classed as ketogenic athletes to carb athletes. And they did show that the carb athletes outperformed the ketogenic athletes by a long margin. But these studies were not done on the proper grounds because it takes time to adapt to become ketogenic. It takes time to upregulate certain systems and enzymes within the body. And as we know, this can be as long as 6 months. the people within those studies had been ketogenic or consuming fat for as little as 3 weeks. They were not supplementing with any electrolytes. So had poor salt intake, and their diet with, as far as protein and amino acids, were incredibly low. These are all things that we need for life, not just athletic performance, and they were devoid of all of these things. So those studies, I question to a high degree, but as we adapt, we adapt our body's ability to upregulate the carnitine palmitoyl transferase pathways and the MCTs, the monocarboxylate transporters, not to be confused with medium chain triglycerides. When we upregulate these systems and enzymes within the muscle, we become a lot more fat adapted. Our bodies can supply this energy to the muscle at a much higher level, arguably, than carbohydrates. So it takes time to upregulate these systems and enzymes and pathways. And this is what's shown in this study. This is a famous study by Jeff Olek. And this study shows that, I think this was done on muscle biopsy level. So they tested the athletes at a muscle biopsy level and tested glycogen levels. And what they found is that the keto-adapted athletes who had adequate time to adapt contained equal levels of glycogen in the muscle before, during, and after an event compared to the carbohydrate group. And it's a famous study, and I know it's one that gets thrown around a lot, but it's always worth repeating. Now, this is part of fat oxidation, the rate that we can utilize fat for fuel. And the keto-adapted athletes increased fat oxidation by over twice as much as the carb athletes. But we saw this in the first study, in one of these studies. But their body's ability to utilize that fat wasn't high enough. They could not perform at a high VO2 max. But in this study by Jeff Olek, they showed that we can upregulate these systems and these enzymes, and we can utilize our VO2 max at a much higher rate. And this is what this shows. And I've got a cracking slide to show you a little bit later on in regards to an athlete I've been working with. But the high carb athletes had twice, at very low rates, of fat oxidation. But the keto-adapted athletes were still able to metabolize fat at an average rate of 1 gram per minute of 82% of VO2 max. Now, one of the athletes I've been working with has blown this out of the park in real terms, which I'll go on to now. But yeah, so this basically, despite these marked differences in fuel between low carb and high carb athletes, there was no significant difference in resting muscle glycogen levels. Just adds further weight to the fact that we can upregulate this lactic acid system and provide our body with glycogen as well as ketones. So we become dual fueled. We can tap into our ketones. We can tap into glycogen stores. So we can still hit these high intense bouts that we need to power up those hills. And what is this one? This study included high-level endurance athletes from triathlon, cycling, and marathon who were put through endurance, strength, and high-intensity interval training. And these are the results from this. So the low-carb group improved their time on average by over 4 minutes, and the high-carb group improved by 1.13. Peak power output increased in the low-carb group by 0.8 watts per kilogram, compared to a reduction in 0.1 with a high-carb group. And the critical power test, peak power decreased in the high-carb group, but it increased to the sum of 1.4 watts per kilogram in the low-carb group. Now, all of these, to me, this is evidence at the highest level that we can compete when we are adapted. And this is exactly what I've seen with an athlete that I'm working with. I've removed the gentleman's name just in case he didn't want to be known. Now, this is a guy who is semi-professional. He has competed in France. His father came to me recently, who is a doctor. He is a fellow PHC ambassador. He's living a low-carb lifestyle, and he wanted his son to gravitate into being keto carnivore and become a better athlete. This was, I believe, only 6 weeks in to becoming keto or carnivore. And he was invited to compete in France at a pro level. So he went, and we can see there. So he traveled 165 kilometers. The moving time was nearly 4 hours. He was pushing out 387 watts, which is, for anyone who knows anything about cycling, that is absolutely incredible. And if we look at the right-hand side, his peak performance, his max heart rate is 200. His average heart rate for that entire event was 181, which means he was running over 90% of his VO2 max for nearly 4 hours, fueled by nothing other than his own body fat. So it is there in black and white. Now, this gentleman, I have asked if he would be interviewed and if he would come on and talk about his experiences. Unfortunately, he's looking for sponsor. He's looking for sponsor within the cycling community. The cycling community is heavily carb driven. The sponsors are all carbohydrate companies, excuse me. And he fears that by doing so, he would diminish any chance of finding, excuse me, a sponsor, which is, it's a shame. And that is but this is the reality. This is the reality of professional sports. There are people who are ketogenic and carnivore at the highest level who are not telling people. And why would you, if you were an elite athlete performing at a high level, why would you tell your competition what you were doing? Yet we all still believe that bowl of pasta and rice before and after event is actually what they're doing. And I question that. But then this brings me on to strength and power. Again, I just give you my interpretation and my own experience in strength and power. But this is a study that looks at ketogenic athletes in elite artistic gymnasts. And this shows, despite a significant fat loss, that the athletes did not lose any muscle, strength or power, but they were able to lose fat. So without carbohydrate, we are told we cannot build muscle. But this study shows, despite lack of carbohydrate, protein, in particular the amino acid leucine, activates mTOR enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and further co-ingestion of carbohydrate did not increase muscle protein synthesis. So extra carbohydrate did not increase muscle protein synthesis above adequate protein. And this study shows the same. But guess what does increase muscle protein synthesis? Protein consumed with fat. Now, I've put a piece of steak there and butter, but that steak is all you need because that steak contains the fat. Nature gives us this perfectly packaged present that contains every amino acid and vitamin and mineral we need, along with the correct ratio of fat. All we need to increase our muscle is consuming animal proteins. In particular, I'm a big advocate of steak, in particular beef red meat. And this is why I believe you and I have noticed significant muscle gains in such a short period of time. This is why I think your clients have noticed muscle gains. And this is why I believe that I managed to gain, what I would consider exponential strength and muscle gain in such a short period of time. And it makes perfect sense. So these are two things that highlight the amino profile in sirloin steak compared to kidney beans, the amino acid profile. And we know that animal proteins are far more nutrient dense as far as amino profile. And then there's a snippet there from Paul Saladino's book, a fantastic snippet which shows every vitamin and mineral compared with blueberries and kale, two so-called superfoods compared to animal proteins. And you can see just by that glance that more of those nutrients are found way higher in animal proteins. Now, this is based on 100 grams, but you wouldn't consume 100 grams of beef. You would consume 500 grams of beef or 1,000 grams of beef. So these figures can be comfortably multiplied by 5 or 10, but we'll play it at its own game. And we know from previous conversations in the last podcast, plants do not contain vitamin A. They do not contain retinol. They contain beta-carotene, which is a precursor that needs to be acted upon by an enzyme called BCMO to convert it into the active form of retinol. Animal proteins contain massive amounts of retinol. B vitamins, super low in plants. Cobalamin B12 is non-existent, as you said earlier, in plants. Vitamin C, yes, is high, but you don't need as much vitamin C when you're a keto or carnivore because they compete for the same metabolic pathway. They compete for absorption, carbohydrates and vitamin C. So when you lower carbohydrates, more vitamin C is absorbed. Vitamin D, we cannot get this from plants. We get this from animal proteins in the sun, and arguably more beneficial from animal proteins. Vitamin K, we cannot get from plants. We get this from animal proteins. I said this in the last podcast in the UK. Kale is stamped with this stamp that says high in vitamin K. Kale does not contain any vitamin K. Kale contains vitamin K1. The human body needs vitamin K2. Animal proteins, choline, creatine, carnitine, taurine, all of these things that we can only get from animal proteins. So animal proteins are the way forward. And I've just got a couple more slides to show, and then we can rip anything apart. But These are a few studies I'm going to run through really quickly, but to understand the studies, we need to understand that there's 3 types of ketone bodies: acetoacetate, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetone. Acetone is a wasted ketone body, which is elevated when we begin our ketone journey, ketogenic or carnivore journey, but our body utilizes and preferences beta-hydroxybutyrate. And this is what these studies highlight. So these are further benefits which aid with athletic performance as well as health and well-being. Beta-hydroxybutyrate blocks a complex called NLRP3 inflammasome. NLRP3 inflammasome is responsible for a lot of the inflammatory signaling within the body. So BHB blocks this. It fights oxidative stress by the mechanism that we mentioned earlier in regards to NAD plus to the NADH ratio. It enhances gene expression. It strengthens bones, coming back to what we said earlier about bone strength in vegans and vegetarians. Supercharges cognition. BHB will breach the blood-brain barrier when glucose can't, and will supply the brain with over 70% of its energy. BHB is utilized in helping people with Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. It increases heart function by as much as 25% and blood flow by as much as 75%, which as an athlete is super important. So living a ketogenic or carnivore lifestyle, we have just restored, by eating that piece of beef and nothing else, plain and simply, we have just restored every pillar of athletic performance. We can, there's an argument for other ergogenic aids, which, we can go into now, but that base of that beef is everything that we need and nothing else to increase athletic performance. It's more to do with the things that we are taking away. And again, if living this way is so good, why does everybody else, believe that it isn't? And it's confirmation bias. Everybody else says it's true, so it must be. Everyone else is telling you the carbohydrates are key, and this is a complete fallacy. And what makes you think no one else is doing it? There are elite athletes all over the world who are living a ketogenic and carnivore lifestyle on the QT. And again, that cyclist that I'm working with, is a borderline pro. He's going to turn pro, no doubt, and he's going to smash the scene. And I'm hoping as he develops in his career that he'll come out and say, this is what I've been doing, and this is who I've been working with. Because it's people like this are going to spread the word. But before I finish my rant, my final thoughts. So in my opinion, and as the research tells us, eating the way that our ancestors did, living a ketogenic carnivore-based lifestyle, consuming lots of saturated fats, proteins from high-quality grass-fed animal sources, while heavily restricting or completely removing processed foods, grains, plants, vegetables, and seed oils high in oxidized linoleic acid, and utilizing ketone bodies by living this way in the form of beta-hydroxybutyrate is the best way to improve our health, well-being, and athletic performance. And that is it. That is, yeah. So I'll shut up now after.
That was great, man.
But
no, that's awesome, man. I think that's so important for people to, to hear and understand, especially athletes. There's a lot of people that are coming to this to lose weight or to regain health, possibly both. It's other people that are like, well, this looks great, but is this just to lose weight? I don't need to lose weight. I'm an athlete. Do I need all these sorts of things? I have to eat. I need to worry about my performance, especially people that are trying to excel in school so that they can maybe get a college scholarship or turn pro, or someone who's already pro. They're like, well, I can't mess with this. This is how I feed my family. And that's very understandable. And so going through this and going through the actual data and the actual science and looking at studies that actually compare what we're talking about, people that are keto adapted, fat adapted, like Professor Noakes from South Africa, he's done a lot of this stuff and shown, again and again and again that exactly the same thing, that, once you're keto adapted, fat adapted, you have the same output potential. And then he switches groups and then so, okay, we're going to keto adapt these guys. And then, the keto guys were going to eat carbs again, keto adapt those, and then see, yep. Okay. Yeah. The output didn't come down. So that's, that's proof of concept there. And as you say, you have 150,000 kilojoules of energy available versus 10,000 with glycogen, right? So, I mean, that's just a no brainer. If you're able to put out the same output, and I would argue you put out more. I've always been able to put out more in that state. And you can, even if you were just doing the same amount, you can sustain it and maintain it for much longer. Yeah. And your hormones work better, and your body works better, and your physiology is better, and your inflammation is down, and you're not having all these other sorts of chemicals getting in the way. Even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just a bit of sand in the gears, it's still not optimal. And if you're trying to optimize your health and performance, this is what you have to consider. And especially for the athletes, especially for people growing up and trying to develop their body to optimal levels, getting the most out of their genetics that they possibly can, and then doing the most with that they possibly can. You need to think about optimization. It's not good enough to just say, well, the good enough treatment. It's like, well, I mean, these are your kids. Like, why would you not want the best for your kids? Well, vegan diet, plant-based diet, oh, that's pretty good, and they're doing all right, and they're hitting their milestones, and their height and weight and head circumference is all really good. It's all, the top percentiles. It could be better. It could be optimal. Why would you not want optimal for your kids?
Yeah.
If there's anything in there that can harm them, if there's any advantage to doing it another way, there's I don't think it's ethical to go for the good enough solution when you're talking about the future of your children's lives, the entire future of your child's life. None of us developed to our genetic potential. None of us did, because we didn't eat the way that we were designed to eat. And, our brains aren't as big, our bodies aren't as big and strong and powerful and fast. And that's it. There's nothing we can do about that besides optimize where we are right now. But kids are different. Kids you can do something for, and they can grow bigger, stronger, smarter, and and they can have a better life as a result of that, potentially. Obviously, what they do with that afterwards is remains to be seen. But this gives them the best that they can possibly achieve genetically, give them, optimize their development from a genetic point of view, optimize their performance both mentally and physically, optimize their physiology and health, so they're not worrying about health issues all the time. They're not taking a whole bunch of medications that give them headaches and side effects and nausea. They're not missing school, they're not missing class, they're not missing work. All these things compound and they build up over years. And so you just take all of that out, you just eliminate it, and now all you have to do is focus on living your life and achieving your dreams and your goals. It's a very different life. It's a very different life. And like, why would you not want that for your kid?
Yeah, and I think education is incredibly important. My little girl, she's only 8, and she arguably knows more about nutrition than a doctor does. Yourself excluded, obviously. But I mean, education is key, isn't it? And this is what I try to do with with my daughter is explain about the benefits and things of living a healthier lifestyle. But yeah, fantastic stuff.
No, that was awesome, man. No, thank you for that. It was a great presentation.
No
Yeah.
worries.
And I just, I don't have anything that I would change or anything like that. Just with the ketones as well, it's not just that your brains can run on this stuff, or can run on this stuff. Your heart tissue and your brain tissue prefer ketones, and when there's always going to be some ketones in your system, but and whatever ketones are available, your brain's taking them in and running on them, crosses the blood-brain barrier, reconstitutes into fatty acids, regrows the physical structures of your brain. And if you have, and this is what, infants that are nursing, they're in ketosis. And that's when their brain is growing like wildfire. And then we change them over to mushy peas and carrots and a bunch of sugary, sweet potatoes and crap like that. Boom. You just put a hard stop on that brain development and growth. So, that's a bad idea. And, when you look at, people say, it's like, well, our brain prefers glucose, that's its primary energy source. The only reason they say that is because you're saying that a fed state and a fasting state in biochemistry. And in a fed state, you're eating carbohydrates, your insulin's up, and you don't have enough ketones to run your brain properly. So you have to draw in carbohydrates. But it is running on ketones during that time. And your brain will always run on ketones if they're available. And if your blood sugar stays up, but your ketones rise as well, as your ketones go up, your brain uses those ketones, whatever ketones are available, your brain uses. And and it will start diminishing down the amount of glucose that it needs. And once you hit a certain threshold of ketones, even if there's an abundance of glucose, just doesn't take it in, and so the vast majority of your brain will exclusively run on ketones. That means it prefers ketones because it has both available, and it only
It
draws
takes
in the
keto. Yeah.
ketones and takes those in. So that's a preference. So your brain prefers to run on ketones. That's its optimal fuel. And as you said as well, I think that we've misnamed these things. I don't think that's a fasting state and that's a fed state. I think, we eat 5,000 calories in ribeye, like you're not fasting, right? So that the whatever metabolic system you're in, it's not a fasting metabolism, right? But we call it a fasting mimicking diet because it mimics fasting because you go into the same biochemistry, biochemical pathway. So clearly that's named wrong. Clearly that's a misnomer. So, we've named that wrong. And I agree, all animals predominantly have that, are in that so-called, ketogenic fasting state. They're not running on carbohydrates. Their insulin is not high. Like bugs and insects or birds that like drink nectar. I honestly, I don't know what their metabolism is, but animals that eat fiber and get the fat and protein break down from that, get fat and protein. Animals that eat other animals get fat and protein. So the majority of the animal kingdom runs on fat and protein, and the majority is fat as a proportion of their calories. So that is what is normal. That is what's natural. And if you're, and so we've just forgotten that. And by the time we were able to look at biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone was just eating carbohydrates, and that's why we just thought that that was a normal thing, because everyone was eating carbohydrates. But you eat anything except carbohydrates, it looks like you're fasting. So obviously, we need to sort of rethink that. And I totally agree that those have been switched around. Our primary metabolic state is one without carbohydrates.
For sure. And coming back to a point you just made, a question that I get asked quite often is, do I have to fast? And the answer that I usually give is, well, no, not really, if you don't want to, because living a carnivore-based lifestyle, being ketogenic will activate. We still see autophagy and mitophagy activation, brown fat activation, the activation of lipolysis. The benefits we see from living a ketogenic and carnivore lifestyle are the same or similar. I mean, varying degrees. Obviously, if we are fasting, we may be able to increase further, but just living the lifestyle, eating intuitively, eat when you're hungry. If you're not hungry, don't eat. But I'd be interested to get your opinion on, so one of the things that I get asked regularly with the athletes that I work with is everyone's in pursuit of being dual fueled. So when can I start putting carbs back in? Because that is a place that they get to, right? Okay. So they become to a point where I'm now metabolically flexible. When can I? And it's almost like this drug is calling them, and they're on this pursuit of when I'm ready to start eating carbs again. Now, I've experimented over the years with carbohydrate because I'm in pursuit of optimal nutrition. Now, if I find a piece of research that will give me an indication that there is an advantage to be had from consuming a small amount of carbohydrate, I look into it. So I've experimented over the years, personally. I've never noticed a benefit. It only ever seems to hinder me. But I'm just one person. I just may be genetically predispositioned not to consume carbohydrate. But in your experience, is there an avenue or a time where maybe an athlete that you've been working with might benefit from carbohydrate? Or do you believe that the upregulation of those monocarboxylate transporters will allow us to upregulate all of these systems and enzymes and enable our body's ability not to utilize carbohydrate and perform at that high level without putting in any carbohydrate?
Yeah, so the question I think is a funny one. Just like, okay, so I've gotten off all these carbs. My metabolism's tuned up. I'm working out. Everything's getting better and better and better and better and better since I got rid of the carbohydrates. When can I go back and start eating carbohydrates, which really screwed me up and was not as good?
Yeah.
That's like saying it's just like someone who had lead poisoning because they were drinking, water from leaded pipes, and they had lead poisoning. They got them off of that and they got them chelated and everything like that. I'm like, wow, I feel great now. Now I'm not drinking leaded water and I don't have lead poisoning. So when can I go back to drink leaded water? When can I do that? It tastes super good, and obviously I need it. Lead's good for you. Like it's sort of funny, because like they've just said like, I feel better now. I'm doing better now. My performance is better now. When can I go back to doing that thing that wasn't as good? Never. Well, I mean, it depends. Do you want to win or not? I don't know. It's up to you. Do you want your body working, to its optimal, to its best? Then no, you can't go back to doing that. If you did go back to doing that, you're going to be more insulin sensitive. not, I mean, you're not going to preload insulin. So right at first, your blood sugar is going to go up, but then you're going to start making insulin. It's going to go rip into your muscles and your body, but then it's done. Then your insulin's up, and then you've just shut off your body's ability to mobilize any energy, and then you have to keep refueling, keep refueling, keep refueling, keep. Why is that a benefit? Why wouldn't you just keep pushing yourself? And the harder you push yourself, the more your body is going, the more your demand is. This is demand driven. Gluconeogenesis is demand driven. It's not just like, well, this is what you've got and that's what you can work with. That's what carbs are. You eat that amount of carbs, that's what you have to work with, right? And then it runs out, and it's over. Whereas in a ketogenic state, sky's the limit. The harder you push yourself, the more your demand increases and the more your body responds. And so there's going to be a limit in how much your body can produce, but that will be better than anything you're going to be able to eat. So you're going to be far better off staying the hell away from that stuff. I don't think that there is an advantage. Now people want to do that and they think that that gives an advantage for some reason. I've spoken to some people that professional athletes, they felt great on a carnivore diet, but they get sort of playing like a longer game, they get like an hour into it and they get just really bad leg cramps. And I'm like, okay, that's sort of, I'm getting into the fourth quarter, like an AFL game, and it's just like, I'm getting burning leg cramps. Like I can't do that. Like, I got to finish the game. And so they find that having a bit of carbs helps prevent that, and so, but there's workarounds and things like that. So that's why they sort of would do that, so maybe they find that there's something that's helpful in those very specific cases. But if we're just talking about athletic performance and energy mobilization, I don't think that it's an advantage. I have never felt better, worked better, performed better than when I just absolutely don't have any carbohydrates at all.
Yeah.
And am just eating fatty meat and drinking a lot of water. And a lot of the athletes that I'm working with now, their performance is getting better and better and better and better and better and better and better. And some of these guys, Ryan Talbot, the decathlete, he's getting ready to go to nationals now. He just got second in the Big Ten competition this year again. So, massive, massive, massive results from a guy who only started doing the decathlon last year, right? And so, so huge. And he was saying that it's just like, he said to me, he's like, this is going carnivore has turned me into the athlete I've always wanted to be. And he's just getting better and better and better. And he's actually found, talking about weight to strength ratios. He's finding, like, it's too easy. He's like, it's too easy for me to put on muscle. It is way too easy for me to put on muscle. And so I'm getting too big, too muscular. And I've got to like actually tone it down in the gym so that I don't pack on so much beef because, he's like, I need to stay fast. He's lean as hell. He's just packing on pure lean body muscle mass. And so, that's a problem a lot of people wish they had. And his performance is just getting better and better and better and better as an athlete. And he's like, now the only bottleneck for me is the technique and the technical issues. There's 10 events and I haven't been doing these events, for the last, 15 years, like a lot of these other guys have, so I'm catching up. But athletically, he's just killing it. He's like, there's nothing, I've no limitations athletically right now. It's just coming down to, improving my technique. So that's where you get at an elite level. And so why mess with that? You're not doing that on carbs. You've never been able to achieve the performance that you had when you were using carbs. Now that you're off carbs, you go such a higher extent. Now you're saying, well, when can I eat carbs again? Why would you want to?
Yeah.
No, like that makes no sense to me. Like, I mean, you're asking when you can do something that's harmful to you. I mean, you could do it anytime you want, but it will never be an advantage. I don't think, anyway.
No, I agree. What about your thoughts on creatine and coffee? Because obviously, being carnivore, we're not consuming a lot of carnivores do drink coffee, but caffeine is a known ergogenic aid. We know that it helps with athletic performance and things. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So with creatine, like, I mean, like you said, like, there's quite a lot of creatine in red meat, especially, and I almost exclusively eat red meat, so I think I get quite a lot of creatine. Um, I've never been a big creatine taker anyway. Like when I was in high school, like, I did try it. I never necessarily noticed a huge difference, but there's a lot of other things going on when you're like, going through puberty and teenaging and things like that. So, you know, I guess it depends on what people are going for, and if they feel they need to meet a certain, amount of milligrams of creatine a day, maybe they want to add in a bit more. I think for most people's purposes, and certainly for my purposes, I think that the amount of creatine that I get in my food is great. And I've never been able to put on muscle more easily. I'm in my 40s, and it's easier to put on muscle now than it was in my
Incredible.
20s. I mean, like, it's crazy. And so caffeine and coffee, the only, people say is like, well, I'll drink decaf because caffeine's not great for you. It's like, well, there's 150,000 other chemicals in coffee
Yeah.
as well. It's not just the caffeine. And and then doing decaf, right? They either have to steam it so you don't get all the caffeine out of it, or they use formaldehyde, and that does get all the caffeine, but it doesn't eliminate all the formaldehyde. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Um, so there are things in coffee objectively that we know about. There's different lectins and tannins and phytates and oxalates and things like that we know objectively can cause a problem, and are the reason that people like you and I have stopped eating other vegetables. So, if we're sort of, going down that route and saying, well, I'm not going to eat lettuce for that reason.
Yeah,
Why would I be
makes
drinking
sense.
coffee? There's not necessarily like a lot of studies showing that, like, coffee is bad for you. In fact, there's some that say that it's beneficial in a number of ways, and caffeine as well. But there aren't really any studies in lettuce either. There are in spinach and a lot of other things as well. But if there's not necessarily a study for every single food item that you have. And so, but just because some evidence doesn't exist doesn't mean that it's not out there to be discovered. And so how I think about it is, objectively, there are these things in there that I choose to avoid, and I avoid other things for the same reason. So, just for the same reasons, I just avoid coffee. And I have tried coffee. I've never really been a big coffee drinker anyway, because it never actually made me feel good in the first place. And when I've since gone carnivore and tried coffee again, I normally don't get sore after I work out, which just pisses people off to like hear that. But I don't. And you can do the same thing. Just try it and you'll see. But when I drink 1 cup of black coffee, I'm sore for 2 days. Right. And so obviously there's something in there that's affecting me. Now, will that have long-term detrimental effects on my health and longevity? No idea. But you know what? I'm sore right now. And so I don't really want to do it. And as far as caffeine doesn't do that. I've taken just caffeine pills on their own to avoid all the other things that are in coffee, and I get the hit of caffeine, but I don't get sore. But I get an initial hit of energy and I feel better, and then I pay for it. And
Yeah.
so, especially if you're looking at this from an athletic point of view, sure, it's going to hype you up, give you a bit of a let's go get them sort of mentality. That's going to crash. And when that does crash, you're going to be at a disadvantage to where you would have been if you just left it alone. And I find that when I'm getting into athletics, and I'm building up energy, and I'm going, because your body meets the demand that you put at it if you're in ketosis. And so when I push myself, my body delivers more energy, burns more energy. I feel better because of that. This is one of the reasons why caffeine makes you feel better, because you burn more energy, and burning more energy makes you feel good. So when I start working hard, I start burning more energy. I feel good. I want to work harder. Makes me feel better, and I work harder. So you get this feedback loop, this positive feedback loop of just pushing yourself harder and harder and harder. So I can get there anyway. You want to jump start it with some caffeine? Sure. But is that going to derail you in the future, and make it so you're not able to perform as well later on, and you're maybe not getting that incredible Hulk sort of buildup where you're getting more and more angry and more powerful at the same time? And so I don't think there are any studies that can elucidate that for us, at least currently. but I think people should certainly try that and just understand that concept in their head. And if you're going to do something short term, you know, like maybe even like a rugby game or something like that, basketball game, whatever, maybe that's an advantage. But maybe it makes you too jittery and you make mistakes. Who knows? But anything longer than that, you're probably going to hit a crash and you're probably going to be at a disadvantage for having done that. But, if people, if you're about to do an athletic competition, sport or whatever, and you find that, taking a caffeine pill before helps you, go for it. But try it without, and know what have something to compare it against, and see what you actually have there, and say, okay, when I don't do it, like, I actually feel great. I take this one, like, all right, I was jittery, but you know what, it wasn't actually that much of an advantage, and I think I prefer this other one. Or you felt great on the caffeine and you felt great without it, but you felt like you had a bit of extra of an edge, go for it. So I think it's personal, but for me, I don't feel that I need that stuff. I feel like I just work fantastic without it.
Perfect. Fantastic, Anthony. Pleasure chatting as always. It's great
Awesome,
to get
man.
into the weeds. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks again for having me on. Massively appreciated.
No, not a problem, man. It's an absolute pleasure as usual. And thank you very much for taking us through that. That was awesome. So hopefully all the athletes out there that are sort of on the fence and thinking about this, they'll be reassured by that, and know that they can do this safely, and it will be a massive, massive benefit. I mean, you talk about how people say they don't want to give the game away. They've got an advantage and they want to keep that advantage. And this is why I try to stress this to people. Hey, this is a huge advantage. You want to be able to perform and excel at a sport from, school age onward. This is it. This will give you a huge leg up on all of your competition. I was always of the mindset that I was happy to, like, tell people what I was doing and how I was training. And it was just like, yeah, because, like, I was confident that I was going to work harder than them anyway, and I was going to beat them anyway. And I wanted good competition. I didn't want to win because, the best players didn't show up. I remember, like, playing different games against top teams, and they're like, oh my God, I got this guy, like, oh geez, oh, this guy's so good. I'm like, good. I hope he's sick. No, I don't hope he's sick. I hope he's, like, pissed off and ready to go. Because well, but that's the thing. If you want to be the best, you have to beat the best.
Yeah.
And you're never going to be the best unless you have the chance to beat the best. So I love that. I always loved playing against that. And I just wanted to play. I just wanted people at their best, and I wanted people to be able to train and be able to beat them anyway. That's what I liked, because, like, I mean, that's not really a prize if you've handicapped other people, and it's not really necessarily a handicap if they're just doing what they're doing. But I'm happy to tell people what I do and how I do it, and I'm going to beat you at it anyway, because I've been doing it longer and I work harder. So there you go.
Yeah, and I'm Carnivore.
Awesome.
Love it.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Awesome, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, please go check out Richard's stuff over at Keto Pro. Can you tell us where else we can find you on your socials?
Yeah. So Instagram is keto_pro. Now, as I say, I work with a lot of people who are low carb ketogenic. So I know this is predominantly carnivore community. I am carnivore, but I do work with everyone at every level. So there are posts on there that are gravitated towards low carb and keto. But so bear with it. Don't let that put you off. The information that we put out is as I'm sure you'll agree, is absolutely fantastic. The website where we do low carb, ketogenic, and carnivore type products and foods is theketopro.com. And I'm on Facebook as Richard Anthony Smith. And we have a low carb keto group called Keto, which we are now gravitated into low carb keto and carnivore. So feel free to check that out. And YouTube channel, which we're going to do, we'll post this, so this will be posted to that as well. And that is keto_pro again, I believe. Yeah, and that is it. Fantastic. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure as always.
No, awesome. And then for those, because we will do a post to put this on both of our channels. So people who wanted to check mine out, it's just Anthony Chaffee MD on YouTube, Instagram, and Anthony_Chaffee on Twitter. And you can sort of find all the other things through those. And yeah, so if you like that, please do Like, leave a comment, let us know what you thought and how this has affected your health and training. And please share this with anyone who thinks you think that would be entertained or benefited by it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you guys coming in, and we'll see you next time.